Training camps are opening up, and we're bringing you the latest fantasy football news. Welcome in. I'm Dave Richard. He's Jamey Eisenberg. Thanks for tuning into us here at fantasynews.cbssports.com. The big news, the most recent big news anyway, is that Jamey Shockey, the brash tight end from New York, no longer in New York.
Yeah, you know, Dave, it's a big trade for the Saints. They send a second and a fifth round pick in 2009 to the Giants, and they get a playmaker who could really improve their offense. I love Jamey Shockey going to New Orleans. You know, with the Giants, he was going to share time with Kevin Boss, and Boss really stepped up last year. Dave will get to Kevin Boss in a little bit. But when you look at Shockey in New Orleans, he's reunited with Sean Payton, who was his former offensive coordinator, and Payton's really going to be able to take advantage of what Shockey's able to do. He's going to make Drew Brees even that much better. He's still a number one quarterback, one of the top 5 guys in the NFL, and now he gets another target to throw to. Marquez Colston should benefit from this. He may lose a touchdown or two, but he doesn't have to face as many double teams. Shockey going to New Orleans is going to really help his fantasy value. Look for him to climb up the rankings a little bit, and it should open up things for that offense. Reggie Bush, Deuce McAllister, all the players from New Orleans should benefit from this trade.
And you know what? In New York, they're also going to benefit as well. Shockey was nothing more than a receiving tight end there, so it's not going to really impact the running game. Boss, a much more versatile tight end. Before you think about him as a number one, though, consider this. He only had 9 catches during the regular season, 5 in the postseason. Yeah, he did have 2 touchdown catches after Jamey Shockey got his leg broken last year. Boss is not going to be that stud tight end that you're going to expect to get with a late-round pick. There are much better options out there than Kevin Boss. He's more of a number 2. That's where I see him going. Now, the receiver who is going to do well because Shockey's not there is going to be Steve Smith. He missed a lot of the regular season, stepped up big in the postseason. Steve Smith is now a sleeper for 2008, a guy that you should spend a middle to late round pick on, and I think Eli Manning's going to do well as far as not having Shockey there. The locker room should be a lot better without Shockey being there. Unfortunately, the headlines in the newspaper isn't going to be as good as when Shockey was there, but overall, the Giants' passing game should still be solid. Now, where does Shockey fit in the tight end rankings? Jamey Eisenberg, we're asking you.
You know, Dave, the one thing that I think when you talk about Kevin Boss, I might have to disagree with you a little bit, just because I think Boss sort of fits in at the end of the first grouping of tight ends, just because, as we know, Jamey Shockey, when he was in New York, was very successful. Eli Manning likes to use the tight ends a lot. I like what you said about Steve Smith. I think he's going to benefit a lot, but I still think Boss will factor in as well, and I would take him probably at the end of that first grouping around guys like Tony Scheffler, maybe Owen Daniels.
You would take Kevin Boss?
I absolutely would. I think Boss proved last year in the postseason that he was a dependable target for
How did he prove? He had 5 catches.
He still looked good.
Where in those 5 catches did you see him?
He still looked good when he was given the opportunity to make plays. I like the opportunity for Boss now, and I don't think the Giants would have made this trade if they didn't have the faith in Boss that he could step up and play the role.
I don't think it's the faith in Boss. I think it's the faith in the entire passing game and the fact that they just didn't want Shockey there. I still think Boss is going to be on target for about 40 catches. I think he might be good for 4 or 5 touchdowns during the year. I just don't see him being – I see him kind of being like a Ben Watson was before Ben Watson really got going last year. You might get a touchdown from him. You might not. That's about as far as you'll get with Kevin Boss.
I think one thing we can agree on, though, is Jamey Shockey going to New Orleans puts him in the top 10. Definitely solidifies his ranking as probably number 7, number 8 overall tight end in most leagues. A guy you definitely want to target in round 8, round 9, around that time. And I think Shockey will get back to being a very productive fantasy.
And you know what? He might slip in a couple of drafts because some people are going to either look at him and say, oh, he's a whiner, he's a complainer, I don't want him. Other people are going to say, well, he broke his leg last year, I don't want him on my team. You know what? He might be good for about 6 or 7 touchdowns. He's going to be a great red zone target in that New Orleans offense.
And don't forget, though, I know you mentioned that he's not a good run blocker. He is a very good run blocker. That's one thing the Giants talked about when he was hurt, was the fact that they felt they were going to miss him in the run block.
They didn't really miss him. You can look at the stats and see that they did not miss Jamey Shockey last year when he was hurt. After all, they won a Super Bowl without him. So all good for them for trading him away and getting a couple picks. Now, another tight end to talk about, someone a lot better than Jamey Shockey. Antonio Gates, he's shown up at camp. Phillip Rivers has too. What's the latest on those guys?
Well, when you look at the Chargers, you know, the biggest thing coming into this year was the injury status. And Antonio Gates, with his dislocated toe, really suffered in the playoffs last year. Says he's 65 to 70%. How do you qualify that? Who knows? But you know what? Gates said that he's getting close to being ready for the season opener, and that's what we're concerned about. You know, you're going to target Gates as the number 1 or a definite top 3 tight end, depending if you like Jason Witten or Kellen Winslow. Dave and I have gone back and forth on who's the number 1 tight end, but Antonio Gates still one of the best at the position. A guy you want to target probably starting in round 4, and the fact that he's getting close to being 100%, however that may be qualified, is a good thing. And then as for Phillip Rivers, he said that he's ready to go from his torn ACL, which is amazing. The fact that he hurt himself in the playoffs and is ready to go for the start of training camp. Another story like Carson Palmer a couple years ago. So the fact that Rivers is on target, You still want to look at him as a number 2 fantasy quarterback, but he's ready to go, and if he's on pace to where he was last year, that could be a good thing for fantasy owners.
Yeah, and I've been a huge fan of Phillip Rivers for a long
You
time.
have?
Yeah, you may not have noticed
I
that.
don't know that.
President of the Phillip Rivers fan club sitting over here. All right, so Phillip Rivers is back. The knee seems fine. It's less important for the knee to be a factor for a quarterback than a running back, right?
Absolutely. The fact that he's able to stand on both legs and get the ball out to those guys, if Gates is there, that's going to increase Rivers' value along with Chris Chambers. So we want to have him healthy and ready to go.
Right, so definitely we'll keep an eye on Antonio Gates' situation for you. He's one of the rare players where if he just gets in a little bit of preseason work, that's good enough to count on him to be 100% when week 1 of the regular season starts. A guy who might not even be 100% at any point during the regular season, Jerry Porter in Jacksonville, torn hamstring. He had surgery. This is a guy who I thought was a sleeper, a contender to be a number 3 fantasy wide receiver, but I have seen so many players have hamstring injuries in the preseason, and it follows them throughout the entire course of the year. Jerry Porter, to me, is now a guy I'm taking off my fantasy draft board, and I think David Garrard is going to be impacted too.
I look at Porter. I like the move of him coming to Jacksonville because he's now going to a more secure quarterback situation as opposed to Jamarcus Russell, who's going to be the starter for the Raiders. But Porter's a guy that's never had 1,000 yards in his career. He's going to a situation where they may increase their number of passes, but they weren't going to turn into a passing team. They weren't going to turn into the Patriots. It's still Maurice Jones-Drew and Fred Taylor. So the Jaguars' passing game was only going to increase Porter's fantasy value to me a little bit. So I think I look at him now as a number 4 guy, a guy to fill out your bench, maybe a number 5 fantasy option. If he falls to me in drafts, I'll take him, but I'm not going to reach for Porter because, again, as Dave mentioned, the hamstring injury can linger. And as far as Garrard goes, I still think he's on the cusp of being a number 1 option, but
Sure.
now I'm definitely looking at him as a number 2 after this injury.
Yeah, there's no question. And bad for me, I drafted him as a number 1 in one of the leagues that
That's
we
right.
did. So don't make that mistake. Garrard is solid number 2. Last but not least, we've got a new top 12 member in the fantasy DST world with Jason Taylor going to Washington. I think it's really going to improve the production there. And, of course, the Dolphins DST, nobody was drafting them anyway, but now you can put them safely 32nd on your DST rank list.
Sure.
So if you're in a 32-team league, get the Dolphins with a late-round pick. Otherwise, Redskins, I
Sure.
think they're a startable unit now.
Yeah, the thing with Taylor is he's going to create havoc for the quarterbacks, which will increase the production probably for the secondary members. You'll see, some of those aging cornerbacks like Fred Smoot, Carlos Rogers, if they're healthy, they'll benefit. LaRon Landry certainly should benefit from having a guy like Taylor pressuring the quarterback. So it should do good things for the Washington DST.
You mentioned increased production for Washington. We've got increased production for you. Training camp time. It's the fantasy season. We're glad you're watching us here at fantasynews.cbssports.com. If you've got a draft prep question, drop us a line. DM Fantasy Football at cbs.com. We're just getting started here. It's going to be a very fun ride. For Jamey Eisenberg, I'm Dave Richard. Thanks for coming out.